Okay, hello again, everyone out there in podcast land. I'm Ward 1 candidate Jacob McGregor, and welcome back to another episode of Your Neck of the Woods, where we're talking about things going on in Ward 1 and all across Calgary. As always, I'm here with my co-host Jason Diodati and Ward 8 candidate Ted Knudtson. Ted, do you want to introduce yourself, sir?
Sure, you did a bang-up job of it, but my name's Ted Knudtson, and I'm running in Ward 8 for City Council. And I'm just really thrilled to be here talking to Jacob and Jason today. Thanks for inviting me, guys.
Not a problem, sir. As we were saying before we kind of went on the air here, we had some hiccups trying to get you on the show. This is a bit of a long time coming here, but glad we get to do it today. So, what I want to start off with is Ward 8's very crowded field, especially with Councillor Woolley deciding not to run. So what would you say differentiates you from the people you'll be running against?
Well, that's a good question. There are 7 of us so far, and I've heard rumors of upwards of 3 or more yet to join. So it could get even more crowded. And I think the first and most obvious difference from me and most every other candidate is that I am decidedly progressive and left-leaning, and am unabashedly so. And we've got a lot of really good, really well-intentioned people running in Ward 8. The citizens of Ward 8 are going to have a lot of really good people to pick from. But many of them, from at least what I can tell, seem to be sort of center or center-right. The exception being Courtney Walcott. So for your listeners who are in Ward 8 and want a progressive option, I'd encourage them to take a good look at Courtney.
Now,
well as myself, of course.
Now, I'm interested to have this conversation with you because it's not one we've had until the last couple of episodes, but I self-identify as conservative myself. People that know me will see me as fiscally conservative, but something I struggle with is that conservatives are often lumped in as not having a social conscience, and I think that's a bit of a misnomer caused by some rather unfortunate things in modern conservatism, where it's gotten away from the idea of small government into this very suspicious and not very accepting realm that I don't necessarily agree with. What do you associate with progressivism?
Well, first of all, I think you're not alone. I think there are a lot of people who consider themselves candidates who feel that their party affiliations have been sort of hijacked a little bit out from under them. There are a lot of really principled conservatives in my own family to start with and throughout Alberta. So I think you're in good company there. And I have no doubt that you folks will wrest control of your party's back and steer the ship where it needs to go.
Yeah.
You know, labels. They are both deeply problematic for a reason that you touched on, and they're very helpful. And I'll work backwards there. So we know that we're inundated with information all the time. Just from every corner, there's information coming in, news and the 24-hour news cycle, and we've got our phones that beam it right into our faces, and we're busy, people have kids and jobs and all sorts of things going on. And so labels can be helpful as a bit of a shortcut So where people don't have the time to get on all the candidates' websites and read reams of long form information, a label, be it progressive, conservative, left, right, can give people a cue as to what you might be about, and then allow them to target their research a little bit better and use their time efficiently. And so I notice in years past, at any rate, and elections past, that people really like to court the center because nobody wants to alienate any segment of voters.
Biggest, widest casting net, for lack of a better term.
Precisely, Jason. That's exactly right. And in doing so, I think they do their causes a disservice. And this is, I think, something that I see very often on the left and in progressivism, where progressive candidates will come out and identify as progressive, but then equivocate and be very careful and sort of try and straddle the middle line a little bit. And I think that people have an appetite for knowing exactly where somebody stands and knowing that they will follow through, not just during the campaign, but after election time. Yeah. And so for me, progressivism speaks to trying new things, first and foremost. So a real hot button issue for me is the opioid crisis. And, you know, it's, we have tried recovery, and it's a component of a strategy, but not the complete strategy. And so safe consumption sites, safe supply, needle exchange programs, this is what keeps people alive until they can get to the point of wanting to recover and enter recovery programs. So if we're going to really get serious about this, we need to put aside the moral arguments about is it right or wrong to use drugs. And this might speak to you, Jacob, but I take the financial approach. It's pay now or pay later. So we've tried the other thing, and the definition of insanity is trying the same thing, expecting different results. Let's chase those financial benefits of dealing with it up front. One small example of which is for every overdose where an ambulance is called, it's somewhere in the order of $6,900 to the taxpayer.
Yes, it is.
If they're in a safe consumption site and have that problem, the cost is much, much, much less. And then we only need to bring up the potential of HIV and AIDS infection. Yeah. And what a 16-cent needle can save over $1 million over the lifetime of care of an AIDS patient or an HIV patient. So what I'm suggesting, and this is kind of what progressivism is to me, is let's leave aside those moral arguments about whether it's right or wrong to use drugs. Let's try new things and course correct as we have to, and try and realize those fiscal benefits as well as social benefits.
And you see a similar tone taken towards, and Jason, you'll know a lot about this with the work you do, the legalization and monetization of cannabis, where we can reap some financial gain from something that was seen by many people as a societal ill. Ted, since you may not be very familiar with Jason, he is a general manager of franchise in the cannabis industry.
Isn't that interesting? That's good to know. Well, I think the line with all this, places like Portugal tell us that.
I was just gonna bring that up, and it
goes down.
It's and so not to. I really don't want to cut you off, Ted, but I wanted to chime in earlier and really touch on your point, and I wanted to bring up kind of some research and a story that was told that I at least had discovered on a TED Talk, and it's short and it does pertain. So there was a TED Talk where there was an explanation as to why drug use happens, and so there was an experiment done where there was a scientist who put rats in a cage, solo in a cage, with two bottles of water, one regular bottle of water and another laced with cocaine, to see what the rat would do and which the rat would prefer. Well, of course, inevitably, the rat would consistently go for the cocaine-laced water because of the dopamine effects and all that great stuff. And again, I'm not a doctor, but this is what the results showed. So another scientist in Vancouver said, I want to try something a little different. I'm going to try this exact same experiment, but I'm going to put these rats or these mice in what he called rat park. And what it is this incredibly diverse. There are other rats where they can have sex and they can play, and there's colorful balls everywhere, and there's an incredible environment for them to thrive in. They showed in the research, it showed that there was I believe it was over a 90% reduction in the year, 95 reduction in use of the cocaine-laced water when they were introduced to Rat Park. And it proves that drug use is not a question of morality, a lack of, or otherwise. It's a question of community and a sense of belonging for most people. And so to tie this all together in one long, nice bow, it's the idea that safe consumption sites, I think, come across as, so you're just funding a habit. You're just like letting someone drug themselves. And it's absolutely not. It's providing that environment of safe consumption to show these people that to show these consumers or these users that there is a community looking out for you. There is a place to go where you can do this safely, because it's an addiction. It's not done on conscious thought, for lack of a better term. So it's very interesting that you bring that up, and I think it's a great point to bring up. And I think it's to look at like Vancouver and to see what they're doing with the decriminalization of small quantity of all drugs. There's something to be said about not looking at the morale side of things and go, why don't we try this, right? Especially when the science backs up. That's the end of my. I will get off my pedestal here. I apologize.
I totally agree with you, and I'd love to see that TED Talk. Shoot me that link, will you?
If you could throw that in the chat, Jace, I'd like to see that as well.
Absolutely, yeah, I'll link you.
Something that anybody from SafeWorks will tell you that's absolutely true is you can't recover if you're dead. Yeah. So this is not an either or. It's a part of a suite of options. And, you know, the other thing that people do with municipal issues in general is they silo them. They say, okay, well, there's opioid crisis over here, and there's taxes over here, and there's downtown revitalization and homelessness and roads. But that is not how life works. Life is complex, and these things are interrelated in very, very complex ways. So it's difficult even to talk about the opioid crisis without talking about homelessness.
Well, I was gonna say, opioids automatically, because of different factors in our city, will automatically tie to both homelessness and downtown revitalization, because those two are tied together as well.
100%.
But before 100%. We branch off into those, I wanted to jump off on this whole idea of recovery, and not necessarily from opioids specifically, but just generally people with mental health issues. And we're telling these people that they need to get help and that they need to find a way to get better, but we're not giving them the tools or the opportunity,
the resources
to do that. And what I mean, and Jason knows what I'm leaning towards, is when you have a mental health issue in the city, it's very often hard to find a place to start. And that's why I'd like to see a portal, say on calgary.ca or somewhere else, where you could partner with all the mental health service providers in the city and have them searchable by cost and program availability and conditions they treat and all these other things, just to give people more of a jumping off point.
I think that's a fantastic idea, Jacob. I mean, we are asking people to navigate a very confusing, complex system precisely at the moment when they have the least faculties to do so. Anybody, I've had my own struggles in my life, and I've had friends who have needed help to navigate the system, and just one glimpse at it, it just really overwhelms. And when somebody is depressed or having mental struggles, they don't have that wherewithal to stick to it and find their way through that.
Well,
and so something like that's a great idea.
well,
And this also makes me think, though, I think a huge mistake that a lot of candidates are making, and early on I've made it myself, where we run into something, charge into the discussion with all these great ideas, with a baseline assumption that nothing's happening with it. And it was just back in March, I believe, February or March, that they released the city's mental health strategy. And I'm not an expert in it, but I'm just doing the work of getting up to speed with it now. And there are some really, really passionate, committed people who really care about this and are doing some really good work. And so to come into that with an idea like your own, to add to that, I think is a really, really great thing to offer to your ward and to Calgarians.
Oh, absolutely. And I will say the mental health strategy that is being crafted is a great step forward. But often what we see with these things is these grandiose sort of policy documents with all these passionate people and not a lot of practical steps that come from them. Now, hopefully in this case, that's not the case, but that's why I tend to come at these things from, here's a practical thing that we can do. And,
absolutely.
And,
Right.
and tied to this mental health portal, I would like to see a pilot program with the province or AHS to do something similar to the low-income transit pass for mental health services to remove that cost barrier as well.
I love that idea, Jacob. And again, I'm sure there's a financial case to be made for that. I don't have the facts and figures in front of me, but it's in terms of lost productivity and wages and tax revenue from people being off work and on disability. I think it would be probably pretty easy if one spoke to the right people to make the financial case.
Oh, absolutely. And not only is there a financial case for this, but we've had this conversation with people from the police union, and they're frustrated that a lot of times they're the first contact point with these people in mental health crises, when if we had some better place to start, it takes pressure off these first responder services that aren't necessarily equipped for this sort of problem.
Oh, you're entirely right. Great work is being done there too in a pilot fashion, where they've got the PACT teams, the police and crisis teams, the interdisciplinary groups, where they're training and sending out a policeman with a social worker and a nurse, for instance.
Absolutely.
That, to most people, I think is just a bit of a no-brainer. And it's this often in interviews and forums like this, it gets raised in a gotcha fashion. Are you for defund the police?
Right.
That's a real hot button issue and really churns things up and divides people and is controversial. But when you break it down, well, no, I'm not interested at all in punishing the police. I think they're fantastic at what we do. I'm interested in correcting a huge mistake we've made and a disservice we've done to them by asking them to deal with mental health issues,
Absolutely.
drug issues, homelessness. We've sort of piled on these tasks. Our police are great at keeping the peace and investigating crimes. They are almost second to none in my mind.
I agree.
And then we do this crazy thing where we will you send out, and it's not just generally sort of two police officers in a single squad car that have to respond to these, but when there's sort of the risk of escalation or that sort of thing, multiple units show up. And how many thousands of dollars does that single call cost?
Absolutely, and it goes back to what we were saying with overdoses and things like the fire department as well, where they have to send trucks and vehicles out with Narcan to deal with this problem that we need to be dealing with the root cause of.
Absolutely. And it's so these, tying way back to one of your first questions, these are traditionally thought of as progressive issues or progressive approaches to these issues. But really, when we tease it apart, and you a self-identifying conservative and me a self-identifying progressive talk about it, really there's something for everybody in these solutions.
Oh, absolutely there can. And that sort of brings me to another topic I wanted to raise in a second, and that's the rhetoric we kind of hear coming from council on both sides of this kind of issue. But just to tie off the whole defund the police issue, since we have opened that that can of worms, so to speak, I will say for myself, I don't necessarily love the defund to fund the group that usually comes at this from the self-identifying progressive side. They are sometimes guilty of similar sins where they'll come at this from a position where it's a gotcha the other way. Well, if you're not for what we're trying to do, then you're stuck in your ways, dinosaur on this issue, and that doesn't really go anywhere either.
Oh, and progressives are famous for their purity tests too.
And in our conversations with our police friends, the general idea has been not that we need to stop having this conversation, but we need to have the real conversation about what we're both actually trying to do here. And when you break it down, it's not actually that different. It's just often a lot of the time we're coming at it throug't a different lens.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I'd like to tie off this, if you wouldn't mind, Jake. I'll keep it short, but I'd like to kind of put in my 2 cents, and the reason being is Jacob and Ted, as you'll find out, I was a graduate from the criminal justice program in Mount Royal. So I've been looking at the defund the police closely from a little bit of a different perspective, because the program that I'm in is very, very proud of the police officers that have come from it, and again, as I would be, and as I am too, to be a graduate of that same program. But the problem, I think, with this whole campaign is that defund the police was supposed to be an eye-catching slogan or title that caught your attention. But I don't think that those who were behind the initial push for that campaign were trying to literally defund the police, if that makes sense. It was taken, I think, in public as a very literal term, where I think the actual intention was to, I mean, if this is even the right way to put it, to reallocate some of the police funding to accommodate for intervention workers who could deal with those things like drug overdoses and things that police just don't really need to be dealing with, mental health crises, things like that, where yes, the argument is that there is some funding that goes to enforcement that would arguably be diverted and not needed anymore because answering those calls would not be part of their job description anymore because we'd have an intervention unit.
Jason,
and so that's
Jason, the thing is that complicates factors is I think you're only partly right there. I think, in fact, there are groups that advocating for abolishing the police.
True.
Yes. No.
And so there's a spectrum of beliefs here that are all under a similar umbrella of defund. And that's where things have gotten really, really difficult to have
murky
a conversation about it. One first has to define the term
operationalize
discussing before we come to agreement about what we're discussing.
And that's what makes this whole issue conflating, and it's frustrating because it's almost, the nuance almost suggests that it was like that was the intention, but it's again, that's a whole other conversation, but that's exactly the issue. And I think it goes further, and Jacob, will let you pivot to the next conversation, but that's exactly it. It's murky and it's confusing, and there's too many subgroups that have taken the name or used the name and advocated louder with more funding and visibility potentially with a different message, and that has definitely been the issue for sure. But Jacob, like again, so I don't want to draw this issue out. I know we're on time, and I want to hit some more topics for sure.
Well, and that sort of comes to what I was saying with the rhetoric, because the same thing happens with conservatives on these issues. I myself, being probably what many would consider a more center-right conservative, get conflated with some people marching with torches and not wearing masks and saying vaccines have microchips in them. And the same sort of thing happens on the left with the more radical abolish the sort of police department being lumped in the same as the let's reallocate funds to practical purposes, and the same thing is sort of bled onto council itself, where you get these factions that talk at each other instead of talking with each other. And I'd like your idea on how we can make council a bit less fractured, if that is possible.
I'm just gonna jump right out there and say I don't think we have to. I think this trope of dysfunctional council is ridiculous.
Interesting.
I think council is functioning exactly how it is intended to function. We have individuals from specific areas of the town who have been elected by their constituents to advocate for their beliefs and advocate passionately sometimes. And do we think for a second that all of these groups from disparate areas of the neighborhood or of the city are going to agree on everything? And if they disagree, is it going to be, Queensbury rules and everybody acting with complete and utter decorum? I think there's a baseline of decorum that we need to show a positive example to kids and citizens and everybody. But for there to be passionate advocacy and even some squabbles and spats, that's democracy in action, baby.
No, I appreciate that perspective, because we've had a lot of talks on here about how to bring a higher level of decorum. So it's interesting to hear a perspective that maybe that is just how democracy is supposed to function, and that this is how the system works when people disagree.
Well,
I think
and
attacking it, and I think attacking current council for being dysfunctional council, you'll just hear that. If I had $1 for every time I heard that, I think it's lazy, and I think it's easy, and I think it panders to people and some of their instincts. But I don't think it captures the actuality of the situation, and I think ultimately does everybody a disservice. And equating the sort of passionate squabbles and aggressive advocacy for ideas and the disagreements that arise, equating that or calling that dysfunction, what that does is that erodes confidence in democracy. And I think it's a shameful abrogation of or dereliction of duty on council candidates.
No,
it's really
I honestly and truly appreciate your perspective, my friend.
and it's really interesting.
And
It's sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Jacob. It's really fascinating your point, your perspective, and I agree. I thank you for sharing it. I think the question for me becomes exactly what is that baseline of decorum, and the parallel that I think about when you bring up that example is MP Michelle Rempel, right? Like I excuse me. I don't identify with really any party, to be frank. I don't self-identify personally. But say what you will, Michelle Rempel fights, right? In what I think is personally might be in certain times seen as, well, is that really the best example we should be setting for kids? But to your point, Ted, is the kind of, like, that is the situation. Like, this is the situation in Calgary. Like, this is what's going on. Like, I'm like, there is urgency there. Like, it's not just, yeah, things are not great. Like, okay, they'll come back. It's no, like, things are not good, and we seem to be ignoring it. And so that I agree with you there, Ted, and it's interesting, and that's why I'm so fascinated by it. And I had to cut you off there, Jacob, and I apologize. But it's true. There's something to be said about what that kind of passion shows, and where that kind of urgency, potentially, for lack of a better term, shows in terms of the representation of their ward and their communities and their constituents.
Well, and I think some of that language that's used distills people down to caricatures, and people are not caricatures.
Right.
A very polarizing figure in this election is Jeremy Farkas. But having worked with Jeremy, Councillor Farkas, to show him the respect that is due on some files within the community here, I can tell you that he is a very sincere and kind man.
oh,
Right.
Ridiculously kind. And
absolutely.
people always seem a little surprised when I say that, but he is just very, very genuine. He just has different ideas about how to care for his ward and the city. And so in the spirit of debate, if we can have ideas from that side and ideas from this side and come together and debate them out in a robust and aggressive fashion, and based on shared values, arrive at compromise, I think that's where the real magic happens.
No, and it's funny you mentioned Councillor Farkas, because I've been guilty of this myself. I have sometimes awarded him the nickname of Councillor No, because there's a lot of no votes that come from that side of the council table. But at the same time, his constituents and the people that support him absolutely love him, because he is very much dedicated to advocating for his constituents and his residents. And
he's very, very genuine. He's accessible. Like, he's a counselor you can get on the phone.
Well, we've been playing telephone tag for a little bit, because I actually do want to discuss some matters with Councillor Farkas, because both him and I have had to overcome some traditional barriers. I myself have a physical disability and I'm wheelchair bound. And that obviously comes with its own, as you said, caricatures about who I am and where I'm going.
Yeah.
And Councillor Farkas has had to deal with some of that in his life as well. So I have nothing but respect for the guy, even if I don't always agree with him. And that's a little bit of what I think we're missing in this idea of debate and decorum.
Well, I can tell you when you have that conversation, you'll enjoy it. And here's the thing, and it was Councillor Farkas himself that reminded me of this when I kind of flamed out a little bit on Twitter and ran my mouth. Depending on the outcome of the election, the other council candidates and or existing councillors, depending on who gets elected, you might have to work with. And so are you going to run people down and paint caricatures of them and attack them and then find yourself across a council table from them and trying to find agreement? It just seems very short-sighted to do that.
Well,
and
that's actually a big...
Sorry, Jacob. Just to say that I see a lot of council candidates choosing to run against certain current councillors, mayoralty candidates, council candidates.
Yeah.
And I think it's short-sighted.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that for sure. And that's actually...
If I can, Jacob, though, I mean, I want to say that politically, my politics and Councillor Farkas's are very, very different in many, many ways.
Oh, I am not surprised to hear that.
But I think that he and I share, I know, in fact, that we have some shared values about, starting from community advocacy. And I really believe that we can learn to work with one another on council. People of different political beliefs, that is, can figure out a way to work together to transact business and to look after our city and its citizens based on those shared values.
Oh, for sure. And it's actually a big part of why I started this show in conjunction with my campaign. And that's because, in theory, 14 of the people that I'm going to talk to are going to be my work colleagues starting in the fall. So you have to be able to build these relationships. You can't see these people as a political foe or a rival. There's somebody you have to work with if you want to get things done.
Yeah. Oh, and there's some complexity there too, in that, and we sort of touched on this as we were chatting earlier, but it can be beneficial to have a foil in the election to define yourself against.
And absolutely. And as I was saying to you, I do often draw differences between myself and, say, Councillor Sutherland, but I don't draw that line at a personal level. All these differences I draw are either on a policy level or directly based on the record.
I think that's very wise, Jacob.
So we've touched on advocacy quite a bit here, and a big part of what I want to do is be that community advocate that listens, because it's really, I see this process as one big job interview where the voters are gonna be the ones hiring me. So you have to do a lot of listening and communicating, and you yourself have been pretty well known for saying, elect an advocate, not a politician. What would you say the big difference there is?
Well, it's a little bit cheeky, but a little bit serious. Essentially, I think that this is a very interesting thing, and I'm sure you'll agree with me. Both of us are first-time candidates, as far as I know.
Oh, yes. Yep.
And the learning curve is steep. And one of the things that you learn is that campaigning is a very unique animal. And it just occurs to me that there are people who have the skills that make them good at getting elected. And those aren't necessarily the skills that will make them good advocates once they do get elected. They seem like different skill sets, though complementary. And so I do not consider myself a politician, although by definition I am, given that I'm running for office in politics.
Yes.
I don't consider myself that because this is not about my career. I never saw myself as a politician. I don't even now look at the next term. That's, I think, a problem when people get focused on the getting elected side of things. They spend the entire term ensuring their electability for the following term. And whereas my focus, and something that I work really, really hard at, is to stay authentic to why I got in this in the first place. And that's to advocate for communities and the people within them.
Yeah. Now, you and I come from a slightly different angle there, because ever since I was about 14 or 15 years old, I was that advanced placement social studies model UN. I volunteer with the campaigns of my local MP. I work on the board of my conservative writing association. So I am very much grounded in that sort of political sphere.
Mhm.
But it's very important to note that both the people close to me and the people I work for and with, like my local MP, have always made it a point, and I will laud my boss, Pat Kelly, until the end of time, because he is a very community centric, very grounded figure. And he has always made it very clear to me that you shouldn't be in this to serve yourself. You should be in it to serve your community.
Absolutely. And, again, it's a mistake to talk about caricatures. So I raised the difference between advocacy and politics to sort of describe what it was that I was trying to communicate with that campaign slogan.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Just as there are compassionate conservatives, there are some really, really community-minded politicians out there. And it sounds like you've got it firmly in mind to be one of them.
Yeah, exactly. And a big reason I got into this when I did was because I didn't feel very listened to. And a lot of the community members I talked to through my board experience didn't feel very listened to by our current representative. And that's just, in addition to these small practical things to improve communities, if you're not feeling represented by your representative, they're not doing their job.
I understand what you're saying.
So we've talked a lot on a philosophical level today. I'd like to get your thoughts on some issue based things, like your thoughts on the Green Line and the event center and things like that, downtown revitalization.
Where do you start, Ted? Let's start with
I'll rapid fire that, and then you can deep dive where you want.
Yeah.
Deal.
A necessary incremental approach to Green Line is better than nothing at all. So yes, it would be absolutely the best if we could do the north and the southeast lines simultaneously, or at least close one after another. But to have to focus on one leg or another at this stage, I think incremental improvement is improvement nonetheless. But I am a big believer in the Green Line. I think it solves a lot of problems that we need to solve, and is really tied into downtown revitalization, urban sprawl, traffic, environmental issues. I think it's really a no-brainer. Any modern metropolis, any world-class city has a world-class transit system, and we're well on our way. We just need to continue that work. And heck, I would go even further. I wouldn't stop at Green Line. I would advocate for something that's, again, this isn't any genius new creative idea by me, but a lot of people have been talking for a long time about a rail connection from the airport to downtown.
I was gonna say airport link. We heard airport link for a few episodes now from people. So
yes,
and I think once, I believe it's Montreal that's working on a rail link to their downtown from their airport now. Once that's done, we'll really be one of the only major Canadian cities without one. And you know, a cost of doing business in this world, if we're going to dovetail and talk about downtown revitalization and the downtown tax shift, well, again, these things aren't in separate compartments. We have to sell ourselves to attract the industry and talent that will come here and help correct the downtown tax shift. And part of the way we do that is by anteing up. It's either ante up or walk away from the table and decide that we're not going to be a world-class city. We're not going to attract that investment, that talent, that industry. Or we push our chips in and we ante up and we invest in Calgary and Calgarians in a way that will attract those things. And Green Line and transit is a huge part of that.
Well, and it's interesting you lumped urban sprawl in, because my listeners will know this is something I'm rather passionate about myself. And for my more fiscally minded listeners, again, if we continue to sprawl outwards, our emergency services get more expensive, our utilities get more expensive, just living in the city gets more expensive the more we spread out and out and out. So we need to start looking at this densification issue in a different way.
Roads, just think about roads, 16,000 lane kilometers of roads that we have to maintain, not just every snowfall, not just year to year, but these things have a 30-year lifespan and have to be replaced after 30 to 50 years, depending on their use. Like we're setting ourselves up with this continued sprawl. Now that number 16,000, the next closest Canadian city with that, or with in terms of their lane kilometers, is Edmonton with 11.
Yeah.
You know, so we are setting ourselves up and our children and our children's children with this burden where all of our tax revenue is going to have to just replace roads.
Exactly. And to again, my tax man, this is the same fight we're fighting now, except we're trying to fight it over capital projects instead of something that can fix the problem longer term.
Yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned was the event center, and I'm still coming to terms with that a little bit. I kind of like where it is right now, where it's being revisited.
Interesting.
When I entered the campaign, it was a done deal. It was signed and sealed.
Yep. I didn't think I'd be talking about Arena either.
Yeah, I wasn't really prepared to relitigate something that was written in stone.
Yeah.
But with the Flames group's new asks, it kind of reopens the discussion a little bit. And I think that's exactly where it should be landing right now. I'm neither for nor against it. I think I have hesitancy for public funds to buy an arena for a sports team. I really do. And, I think Edmonton would be the only other example, as far as I know, where a municipality has done that.
There's lots of them in the States. It's sort of the state of play right now with these sort of negotiations. And that's why no matter what the deal is, that's what the deal's gonna look like, because you're never gonna end up with a deal with CSEC footing the bill, because they're gonna constantly bring up all these examples of public-private partnerships in other cities.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to public-private partnerships, but why I think this has landed in a really great spot is another aspect that people haven't been very comfortable with, is how these negotiations happened, and some of them.
There we agree 100%.
Yeah, many of the negotiations happened in camera and behind closed doors. There's a lot of information we don't have.
No.
And I think this, something I think a lot about is finding the opportunity in crisis. Crisis will always fall upon us. And if this is a crisis, what's the opportunity?
Oh,
here?
the good old Simpsons conundrum of the crisis-tunity.
So for my mind, I think it's just really, really healthy and a good thing that we get a chance to revisit that, and perhaps rethink how we're engaging our citizens when we do.
Hey, even on a lighter note, getting away from these the money and the negotiation side of it, I'm a hockey fan. I'm geeking out a little bit about potentially being in the room to get this sort of deal done or not done. But it's something that if you are an invested sports fan, it's something you've always kind of said, wouldn't I like to be a fly on the wall in this sort of situation?
Oh yeah, and there's plenty of arts fans that would be right in line with you.
Exactly.
Think of all the concerts that we can attract right now. Although concerts aren't yet a thing, they will be again. And
absolutely,
there are certain big touring acts that can't play the Saddle Dome because the Saddle Dome can't accommodate their sound rigs.
When you have
absolutely.
an arena that was state of the art in 1983, that's eventually gonna happen, right?
And again, it touches back on what you were talking about, Ted, of a world-class city, right? We are, in my opinion, in need of a world-class event center, and exactly as Jacob and I have talked about it, exactly like you guys touched on here, is that there are, I think, those who feel like this project is not for them because they don't watch hockey, and I think it's just a lot more than that. I think that I think that, for example, Comic-Con or Comic Expo will definitely happen at that event center versus being at the BMO. I really do.
Yeah, and millions of dollars that come in with those people.
And so for those to say that there's no benefit to the city, for example, because I think there are some who are saying that, I respectfully but strongly disagree. I believe that I think Jacob and I at least believe that it would be an economic driver.
It could be. It could very well be. Now, there's certainly some articles that you can read and some information you can read and studies that you can read that would dispute that notion and challenge that math. But it's deeper than that. It's more than just the dollars and cents that you can see on a ledger. There are some aspects about what it says about us as a city, how it enables us to attract talent, industry, investment, all that sort of thing. But you touched on something, Jason, that I think is really important, and I think will apply to most everything we've talked about today. And that's the notion of personal investment. So it's very easy for people to be against the Green Line who never take transit themselves.
Of course.
It's very easy for somebody who never encounters the effects of opioid addiction, either on the street or in their own
Your family.
Yeah. And to deprioritize it because of that lack of personal connection. And something that I hope all of your listeners will take away from this is to take a hard look at their own personal investments in things and put in some earnest effort into understanding the other people who are invested if you're not, and are they willing?
Oh, absolutely. Because everybody's got
somebody that we should be taking care of as well.
Everybody's got things they care about. Not only that, but we are in the business of city building here. Like you said, we want to attract talent and industry. And if you're just not gonna build these transportation or other capital projects, you're just ignoring that element of city building. Not to mention, you're stagnating the entire atmosphere of the city. And we've talked about that recently as well. The city needs a little injection of hope again. Like there's this, it's a different feeling walking around the city now as opposed to, say, 5 or 6 years ago.
Again,
or at least we've had some people say they've experienced that, and I've experienced that a little bit.
But I'm going to take a counterpoint here, Jacob, and say, I think we might be beaten down a little bit, but we're still the can-do city we always have been. And I think we're just, it's not a matter of that spirit. The spirit doesn't exist anymore so much as we're facing a bit of an identity crisis. And that's
a good way to put it.
We really need leaders of vision to come in and to get people excited again. One of the last things that really defined and united us was the flood. And we're the city that beat back a flood and held a stampede weeks later. That spirit still runs through us. And what we need to do is give people a channel for that, an outlet for that, and a vision to get excited about.
No, I think you worded that more precisely than I did. But we do need that spark. We do need to get excited again. So we've been doing this recently where I've been asking our guests on the more lighter side of things what's their favorite part about living in their ward, because we can have all these policy and philosophical discussions, but you live here because you love it here, hopefully. So I'd like to know something you love about living in Ward 8 right now.
Oh, well, at the risk of pandering, I'm going to say it's the people.
Amazing.
Hands down, the people. We really have a very diverse ward, from the Beltline and Mission and Cliff Bungalow and Lower Mount Royal, to some beautiful storied neighborhoods of Mount Royal and Rideau Roxborough and Elbow Park. I've lived in many of these neighborhoods over the years: Bankview, Altadore, Marta Loop, these Shaganappi, Sunalta, Scarborough. Like, these are the heart of the city. They're just filled with passionate Calgarians who love to live here, and they're just all walks.
Absolutely.
And speaking of walking, I can leave my condo here in Mission, and if I walk east, I'm at Repsol Center in Lindsay Park and on the River Pathway system. If I walk west, I'm over on 4th Street, enjoying some of the most amazing restaurants there are in the city. I walk north and I'm on 17th Avenue, the Red Mile. I walk south and there I am walking through storied old historic neighborhoods. This is the best city in the world, and to my mind, this is the best ward in the city.
Born and raised, love it here, and it's interesting, this question. I'm glad I started asking it a few episodes ago, because we've heard everything. A lot of it you just mentioned: the people, the pathway system, the food in the city, the views. I live up here in the Northwest. I'm next door to the mountains. That's unbelievable.
Absolutely.
And there's so much to love about living in the city. And again, Jason is right there with you near downtown, so he's probably nodding along to a lot of what you just said.
Well, and that's exactly what I was going to say. I didn't want to reveal early in the conversation, because I'm worried it's going to affect the conversation. But I am, as it stands, at least, I am in. I would be voting. I live in your ward, for lack of a better term, in the ward you're running for.
Well, you're going to have your work cut out for you deciding who to vote for, because there really are a lot of great options.
Yes, there are, and I'm really glad that we had this conversation today, Ted, because you seem great as well, and your philosophy, I think, aligns really well with Jacob as well. And I think you both would be excellent additions to this new mandate of council.
Oh, thanks so much for saying that, Jason. Talking to you both today has been an absolute treat. I could just do this all day long, every day. This is so much fun to talk about the city we love.
I'd love to be able to do this in the same room as well, man.
Yes.
Has Zoom ever been a great tool for this sort of thing? But I'd love to be able to have this conversation in the same room as you, which leads me to my every episode spiel about get your vaccine, especially now that we have the plan to reopen once we hit that 70% threshold. Everybody that gets their shot is another shot closer to reopening day. So get your vaccines, people.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Vaccines are safe and effective. I've had mine. Jake's had his. Ted, I'm not sure about you, but
absolutely, I have.
Yeah, let's get back to reopening Calgary, guys. Everything and everywhere. Hopefully in Canada and everywhere. Let's get everything open and let's move on and beat this thing, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, can't wait to see all of you at different community events when we're allowed to have them. I will plug some stuff that's coming up here in our neck of the woods in the Northwest. Once again, there's the Trywood Farmers Market in Silver Springs starting weekly on June 1st. Scenic Acres Community Association is having their annual general meeting on June 10th. I'm going to be on a couple of forums with other candidates on June 7th and 14th. I want to continue these conversations as much as we can. So get out to these community events. I want to see you at the forums. Let's talk Calgary.
And I'll echo that and throw in a plug for community associations. Folks, membership at your local community association is dirt cheap and worth every penny, and can just open all sorts of doors for you.
Pay $25 to be part of the Tuscany Community Association. Nothing wrong with that. You get access to different community sporting events, the Harvest Festival, all these small kinds of things that make a community what it is.
And more than that, you can bring your ideas to community associations and they can help you make them happen. They are committed, passionate people who love their communities, And for instance, with us at the CBMCA, the Cliff Bungalow Mission Community Association, we had a lovely, brilliant woman by the name of Kaylee come to us with an idea for a movie in the park. And weeks later, there we are sitting under the stars watching a movie. So
I love it.
Absolutely.
The ideas, the resources, and the talent to make these ideas happen. So don't feel, if you look at the programming of your community association, that's all there is.
Yep.
They're a vehicle and a template ready to jump in and join and make things happen.
These are people that make things move in the city. So yeah, get out there and be a great participant in your community, because every person that does that makes their neck of the woods a better place.
You bet. Jacob
Absolutely.
and Jason, it has been such a treat to talk to you both today. I really appreciate it.
So we will be wrapping things up pretty quick here. So do you want to plug your website and everything else there, Ted?
Absolutely. My website is at tedforward8.ca, and that's the number 4 and the number 8. And you can go there and get an initial sense of what sort of campaign that we're running. And over the coming weeks and months, we'll be releasing some hard policy and platform planks, and having a bit of a dialogue with everybody in Ward 8 and throughout the city.
Yep. Jace, final thoughts for today, man?
Thank you so much for joining us today there, Ted. I would feel the exact same way. I feel like we could chat about this for literally ever. Hopefully I see you walking around one day, and I'll say hi, and hopefully we can stop and chat for a little bit. But yeah, and hopefully we can have you back on the show, because I think we're gonna have time for some duplicates, and we'd love to have you back. These conversations are so important, and your perspective is unique and awesome. So yeah, hopefully we can bring you back in. Thank you very much, and again, get vaccinated. Let's get everything opened up.
Absolutely.
Speaking of keeping the conversation going, if you guys want me to cover a specific topic, if you have questions for me, if you want information about what's going on in your communities, reach out to me on social media. Yeah, that's at Jacob for Ward 1. I'm open and honest and willing to answer all of these questions. I will get you that information. And then campaign wise, you can always go to jacobforward1.ca, and it's a little under 5 months to election day, but get out and vote. Make your voice heard. We talked about making democracy work today. Be a part of that. Every vote matters, guys. And
Absolutely.
for another episode, that is what's happening in your neck of the woods.